Welcome to Deal Nation. Today on the show, we have Jonathan Greene, the host of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing, and a man with, I'm not going to say how much experience you have in the industry, Jonathan. I'll let you talk about years and numbers, but someone with significant experience in real estate investing and some great advice to give.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it and for trying to keep my age a mystery. But I have been in the game over 30 years because that's actually just my adult life. The honest truth is, I've been in the game for probably more than 45 years because my dad used to drag me around to everything from the time I was a baby. We were doing off market acquisition before I was probably out of diapers. So my history is long, but of course, it's adjusted over time. And really happy to talk to your audience today.
Yeah, I mean that's a long time. Like
I'm
I
old.
well, I often like joke that the distressed property market was an industry that Rich Dad Poor Dad launched, and
Yeah.
so you're like pre-Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's like a BC number, right? So
Yeah.
I'm I'm really curious to get kind of a hop, skip, and a jump through your history to see what it was like, even prior to that real jump in interest in the distressed property market.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was way ahead of his time. He was really rich dad and poor dad in one because he came from nothing, um, built a very substantial portfolio um, because he was a very good acquisitionist, and he was a nice guy. And that's kind of what now I think people are forgetting, and something I know we're going to talk about is he was very good at negotiating because he was actually listening to the people that he was negotiating with. So we spent our weekends doing things that, there was no internet back then. So we would get lists from the courthouse of potential foreclosures because he knew everyone there. He was an attorney, and he just knew people there. So we would run the lists and go. And at the time, there were no lock boxes or anything. So you go, and if no one was in there, you just find a way in, which was me climbing through the windows and opening the door. And we would look around, bought a lot of properties like that. And we also spent the weekends going to yard sales, and he would make an offer on every house at every yard sale. And I was just happy to get a football when it was over. But he was very empathetic and smart. But he was a very good businessman. So occasionally people would come back later and want something else. And he's like, we made a deal. But I was passively learning even as a child just because of the way that he did business in life. And I think it set me up for a different way. Whereas, of course, now we're flooded with content on the internet. People are trying to figure out, hey, what's real? Who knows stuff? A lot of us who are doing it before the internet still doing it the same way, just with a little bit of whipped cream on top to make it better. But the dialogues are the same.
I love that. We had Brian Driscoll from Motivated Leads on
I
recently.
know, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, and Brian started by putting ads in the newspaper. Like
Yeah.
that's how he got it. And he recently went back to that and he tried it again just to see. Like it's a marketing channel people haven't really been using recently. So
Yeah.
maybe yard sales is the next thing. Maybe people are
It,
going to go around to yard sales, get a couple of
it
vintage
works.
lamps and some
Yeah,
deals.
and my dad used to get the penny saver. He was in Westchester, New York at the time, and yeah, he was combing the penny saver for other things. But I mean, I learned about real estate and investing in general by looking through newspapers. That's how I learned about stocks. I would look at the stocks every single day like they were a sports box score, and I think it helped me. The reason why I practice what I consider to be a mindful approach now is because I had that experience and I didn't have to leverage technology because it didn't exist when I started doing it. When I looked at my first property as like a proper adult, there was the MLS was a book in a realtor's office. So there was no photos. So we would show up to 6 and I would just get in the front and be like, that's a no. And the realtors didn't understand, what an investor was. They think they're selling. I mean, I was buying a home, but everything's an investment to me. So,
Yes.
it was just a different world. So I think that the way that I practice is modernized, but still focused on the really core values of what I learned from my dad.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned like it was before the internet, it was before a lot of like even a tool like launch control, which you're sending out as individualized as you can make the messages, you're reaching a few hundred people at a time,
Yeah.
right? Where when you started, you really had to meet that individual, get to know them, assess their like what their motivation was. Like the things that people are the same steps that people do in discovery calls now, right? Like
Yeah.
finding a deal or landing a deal is kind of the same. But you had so much more of a face to face and just, facial reactions and the things that you don't often get when you're churning calls.
Yeah, and I mean, if you go back to the original principles, which still exist, if you're just driving for dollars and driving a neighborhood now, and you don't have an app and you don't have any technology and you just have a flip phone or whatever, all you have to do is look at what houses look to be in distress, because those are the ones that are likely going to be an issue. If you find out that the owner's living there, that's a different approach. If you find out that they're an out-of-state landlord, that's a different approach. And the problem with technology is not necessarily what it's doing for people. It's that people think the technology is going to make everything happen and they don't have to do anything. The technology is the kind of conduit to the person, but then you still have to be able to do the right conversations with the person. So if I drive by a house at 100 Main Street and there's two windows off and there's a hole in the roof, and then I look it up and it's a homeowner, again, like I said, that's a completely different dialogue than if it's someone who lives in California 3,000 miles away. And that's where I think the miss is. A lot of people are using scripted dialogues for probate, divorce, pre-foreclosure, foreclosure. Those are all different dialogues, but it's impossible for someone to hire a VA to do 7 different dialogues, or else they're just reading the script, and that's not how you connect with people. So, I think it is fair to say that, what you're saying, my background helps me know that the job is to build a relationship with the person. If you do that, you can't do as much volume in terms of outreach, but you can do a lot more, successful deals, I would say.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a question of templates, really, where if you're having that conversation, like I said, it's 7 different dialogues, right? And just to backtrack a little bit, I think a lot of times with the technology, a text engagement tool like Launch Control, direct mail pieces that you're sending out, CRM tools that you're using, something like PPC where you're getting leads coming in. These are tools that were meant for business development, right? Whereas a lot of times, especially in the early stages, where people just want to see if this is a fit for them, to see if real estate investment is a fit,
Yeah.
really going old school and not even engaging too heavily with technology yet, but having those out-of-state landlord conversations or that probate conversation in your own backyard and learning what you need to go through for that dialogue. Because for a lot of people, if they close 2 deals in their first year, it's just supplemental income to their job.
Right.
And that might be 40 grand. 40 grand is life changing for most people.
Yeah.
So and that tells you whether you're ready, or even if it's a good fit for you to start engaging with the marketing tools, which are gonna, bring you potentially a life changing amount of money, or certainly a career changing amount of money.
Yeah, I think, people have to look at all the technology as the way to reach somebody, but it's the lists that you build that really are what the technology is using. So if you use a list that incorporates 10 different potential avenues of sale, you're not going to know which call you're getting on. So I'm a practicer of micro marketing instead of macro marketing. So I'd rather send less postcards instead of what I call spray and pray, which is sending the maximum amount because you have a good budget. But then you're not have a streamlined organization of what comes in. You're going to be like, oh, great, this is pre-foreclosure. Let me pivot to this. So I would really, if I was a new investor, I would focus on a neighborhood. I would do handwritten letters. And when I started to get good, then I would leverage technology to smaller lists. So the technology is automatically better because your list is better. So a lot of people probably come to you and they're like, oh, it's not working. And then you say, well, what list are you using? And they're like, well, I picked a list of 20 years owned. Oh, okay. Do you know how many different types of owners are in 20 years owned? That's 14 dialogues. So it's not that the technology is the issue. It's the person on the other end who wants technology to make it just extremely easy, which is not. It's the bridge to the person, and then you have to take it from there. I mean, it's like a relay race without the fourth person. It's like not going to run itself. You take the baton and you have to run the rest of the way yourself to win the race.
Yeah, I agree completely, and it's something we really preach at Launch Control, because the first text message that you send is the starting point of a conversation. Right? Ultimately, you want them to engage with you in a conversation. You want to be able to push that to a discovery call so you can really go through the motions of real estate investing. But it starts with the opening salvo of a conversation. And so the more granular that you can be in terms of using the data to profile who you're speaking to, and to profile the areas that you're reaching out within. So if that for instance, that you're talking to somebody that is in a high equity or free and clear situation in a specific neighborhood, you can leverage in a positive way things that you know about their current situation and the area and they live in, to build interest in a conversation with you. But
Yeah.
as you said, if you're doing spray and pray, you're not going to be able to do that. And the other thing, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is the other thing that I think is super valuable about that, especially if you're just starting out, is you're seeding what you need to scale up. Because if you are an investor that's doing seven figures, like your system is going to be a mess unless you're
Yeah.
tracking like, these are our probate leads and these are our probate conversations. These are out of state landlord leads, and here's how we navigate those conversations, right?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I would say is, you know, you take a template for a text, and what I would do if I was using any system is I would take the template and I would customize each text. But people don't want to do that because they're lazy and they just want to make it all work, which is spray and pray, which again can work. If you have unlimited money, spray and pray works. However, it's not efficient at scale. It's just not efficient. You can be much more efficient. So say that the text was, hey, are you interested in selling your house? That's not what I would say, but just say that's it. So there's a bigger difference if you just send that. Your response rate's going to be like 0%. If you take that, put the template into your text, and then you add, I see you've lived there for 13 years at 123 Main Street. I invest in that area. Let me know if you ever have any interest. You just changed the dialogue 100% by actually trying harder. And I think what everyone does is they, like I was saying, they expect it to just work for them. But if you just do a little bit more and you make that connection, you have to give something to make a connection. I get random texts all day about just nonsense. Hey, are you still a real estate agent? Are you still a real estate investor? I'm like, are you serious? So I play with them all day just because I find it funny. But imagine the difference if someone says, are you still a real estate? I've seen you've done 13 deals this year in the area. I'm still not going to answer, but it's what you're putting out there and then the expected response, which I think is the problem. It's just not that easy. It goes back to what we were saying in the beginning. You still have to build a relationship, and as you were saying, that first text is the start of a relationship. So if it's impersonal, you're telling them, well, I'm sending this to everybody. Like who really enjoys a text that they know is going out to 500 people? Just take podcasts, for example. Of course, we're recording on your podcast. I have a podcast. So when I get an email from someone who wants to be on the show and it's clearly written, doesn't say anything about it, they've just inserted, my podcast name, that, maybe they say they listened to they didn't listen to the last episode. It's the same thing they're sending to everyone. I'm not interested in that person. And I don't think your regular mom and pop seller is very interested in selling to a corporation that's spamming them either. And that's where I think a lot of people are failing.
Yeah, and even within that those subgroups. So let's say like you want to target out of state landlords in a certain area. You still need to, in marketing terms, A/B test, and that can be fun, right? That can be, you can really take an interesting approach to that, where you can take with an out of state landlord, you can send them a text that is focused on just the ease of working with you, right? You could do one that says something like, pick a feature in the area of, I'm looking to pick up a property within 15 minutes driving from the downtown area. I'm expanding my search, see if you'd be interested in talking about a deal for your place, right? And uh, the thing that every marketer knows is that the approach that you were sure was going to kill it, the approach that you were sure was the golden ticket, often isn't the one that wins, right? It's often a different subject line. It's often a different text message.
Yeah.
It's you can't, no matter how much experience you have, you cannot with 100% certainty say what people are going to respond to or not respond to. So if you A, B, C test a few things, then you can actually use the data and say, yeah, like in this area, out of state landlords are responding to this. And then if you go into another market, run the same test
Better
again, because
chance.
in another markets they might reply differently or respond differently.
Yeah, well, I mean, just think about out-of-state landlords in general. Again, we think of that as a subsection, but I can tell you that if you're reaching out to out-of-state landlords, the most important is how many properties they own in this state that you're finding the property in, and how far away they are. So the way that I run those lists is out-of-state landlords. I first only focus on the ones who own one property in a state and they live the farthest away. That's the top of my list. So if there's one property in New Jersey and they live in California, that's the first person I'm calling. Why? Because they're the farthest away from the property and they only have one property. If you're calling someone who lives in California but they own 13 units in New Jersey, they have property management. Like they're running a business. So maybe you do get a portfolio deal, but that's a different dialogue than the one person. So I always stack my lists in a way where they're all ranked. And that means, as you were saying before, doing advanced research in beginning because I want to be efficient. So if I live in New Jersey and I'm ranking from California back from the West and how far people are away who own one property, I'm going to be at like a 70% at least response clip, whereas your normal spray and pray is going to be like, 1% because I'm really focused before doing the work in advance, just like my dad was, combing through lists, seeing where they are, knowing the addresses. It's not just turn on and send stuff. And you can't have a conversation with someone in New Jersey if you don't know the blocks. The reason that the way that you get to off market sellers is by knowing the area. Hey, we bought 13 homes. Do you know Bob and Sally? They live 3 blocks away. Oh, actually, I do know Bob and Sally. Boom. Now you have a relationship. But it's become so detached because people may think that the technology can do everything. It's not the technology's fault. It's that they're lazy. They want to pay for something and then they don't want to do any work. But if you use the technology and then do back research, front research, and you're working with it, you're probably 10 to 20x what the other people who are just sitting waiting around for the calls are going to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The principle behind launch control is how to have, we send max batch of 150 messages. But the idea is that we want to send individual messages to each of those 150 people, and we want to start conversations.
Yeah.
So if 25 solid conversations come out of that, it's a great return, right? But we see it as you're reaching an individual and starting a real estate investment conversation with an individual. Like strip the volume side of it out, strip the mass outreach side of it out, and look at the end result, which is how many conversations did it lead to, and how easily were you able to convert those conversations into potential deals. And so
Yeah.
it really is individual to individual.
Yeah, and also your speed to response is hugely important. So if you
Mm.
activate something with technology and then you wait till the next day to follow up and you have 4 leads, they're not interested anymore because they know that you're a bot, or that you're not paying attention. If you send out the 150 and you're just waiting there for the next hour, you're going to catch the fish who are hottest. And I think people think that, whenever you're doing off-market marketing in real estate, you get some percentage of FU calls. Those are the best because they're not mad at you and they probably want to sell their properties. So that's like the challenge of negotiation is when somebody tells you not, hey, I'm on the do not call list, that's fair, you shouldn't be calling them. When they say, hey, I'm getting all these calls from real estate investors, great, you're going to just pivot that conversation. They want to talk or they're not calling back. So everyone's like, oh, this doesn't work, everybody's cursing me out. It's like, wow, you're closer to a deal than you think. You're just not willing to have the conversations because you're uncomfortable. But like, don't get into the business if you're uncomfortable listening to other people's issues with you reaching out. You have to be transparent about it. Hey, look, this is all publicly available data. I don't know what you're getting so upset about. Is there something wrong? Is there something that I can help you with? And that's how you adjust your dialogues, because like you said, you're using something to get you in the door. But once you get
Yeah.
in the door, you can't not be there, or can't not show up on time. You have to show up and be ready to have that conversation that's open-ended instead of, hey, I want to buy your house for cash, when 90% of off-market sellers aren't interested in a cash deal. They're interested in you solving their problem.
Yeah, and it's talking to an individual, right? So like if you imagine a text message as knocking on someone's door, if you went and knocked on someone's door and said, "Hey, can we have a quick chat about your property?" and they said, "Kick rocks, I'm not selling," you're not just going to be like and silently back away,
Yeah.
right? Like you're going to have a retort, you're going to have a response. So if you think about it as like, with a text, they're literally holding their phone in their hand, right? But if you think
Yeah,
about it,
and
it's
it's
really
easy.
face to
Like,
face.
yeah, it's so much easier than face to face. I mean, like if someone
Correct.
responds to you on text, sure, it is easier for them to respond. So maybe they're playing around. But if you're smart, I don't talk on the phone at all. Everybody knows this. Everyone calls me number one texter in the world because I will not talk on the phone unless it's scheduled. Because
Yeah.
there's nothing that I really need to talk on the phone about. So I become excellent at negotiating through text and redirecting them to text because better use of my time because I'm always here. I can do the text, but I could be, on a webinar. I can still text. I'm barely paying attention in some webinars.
Yeah.
These are things that you can do while you're doing other things. And that's why texting is so important. It is a lynch. Of course, eventually you're going to want to get on the phone. I don't want to go out on an appointment before I've had a full conversation unless I'm rock solid. You got to do your due diligence. You can't just walk into any situation. And you don't, the thing with spray and pray is you might get 6 appointments the first day, but if you don't vet the appointments and see where they're at, you're going to go out on, and I've done this, you can go out on 6 appointments where the people want, 300,000 more than the house is worth, and you just drove 45 minutes each way for no reason. You don't go on those appointments because that's not going to help you. So you
Yeah.
have to really figure out like what's the efficiency scale here? How can I go from 1 to 2, 2 to 10, 10 to 20? But it all goes back to the same principles. Are you focused on the person or are you focused on the deal? If you're focused on the person, you're going to get way more deals. It's a no-brainer.
You've referenced a couple of times like the depth of research that you do going in. So do you have kind of a template that you follow, or is there a process that you follow to really get that research? Because uh, I think it's really valuable, and I'd love to be able to give the listeners some insight
Yeah, it's called OCD. I really like data and I like winning. So if I don't make phone calls anymore, but when I did, I want to make sure that I'm in the best spot and that I know the most information because they're going to come back with you with a bunch of how much is my property worth. I have a great response to that is like, how could I ever know how much your property is worth before I've seen it? However, this online portal that I use says it's worth 256, 320. Is that a price that you think it's worth? And there you go. Boom. You're going to be in a conversation for a long time. I use Google Maps a lot, even though it could be out of date. I'm going to go on the property. Again, I'm ranking them. So if I'm at my number one prospect, I'm going to take more time looking at that, an out of state owner who's 3,000 miles away. I really want that. That's going to be a good call. So could my research be wasted time? Yeah, maybe, but you're usually mailing the same area. So I'm doing due diligence on the area to make sure I'm looking at Google Maps. So I could say, hey, I looked up this. If you're in the area, even better. Hey, I walked by the house yesterday. That's the magic of being in the area. But it's a combination of technology, Google Maps, doing research on the people, looking up Facebook profiles, basically, lightly online stalking someone without a real stalking reference. I'm just doing, due diligence, public information available on these names and addresses to see if I can find something, especially important in probate situations because you're not, people forget that probate's not a straight line to a deal. There's usually 2 or 3 heirs and they're never going to agree on what they want to do. So you have to figure out who the mouthpiece of that is to really get anywhere. And if you don't know that, you're going to spend a bunch of time. You think you're going to have a deal, and then the cousin Sally, who's number 2 on the list, is going to say, "I don't know, I want to live there." And boom, there goes your deal. So
there.
yeah, I think it's just again, I joked about OCD, which of course is a serious condition, but I'm very OCD-ish without having actual OCD. I want to know as much about the person as I can, and a lot of people think that's wasted time, but they're very, very wrong because I'm going to be ripe and ready for my top conversations, and that's what you need to be. When you're in the beginning, as you were saying in the beginning, you just want to get your first deal because it's not about the 1 and 2 deals. You could have that extra 40K like you said in the beginning, but really it's about building your confidence. You go from 1 to 2 figuring out which way is up. You go from 2 to 10 because you've built up the confidence in your processes and your dialogues to know that you're doing better and you're better with the people. And then you go from 10 to 100 when you try to scale that, but there's a lot of mess that can happen that way because you're probably getting away from your core principles that got you from 2 to 10.
Yeah, and it like what you're saying is not time. It's not a time killer, right? It's if I had gone into you're a known entity in the real estate investment industry, but if I had gone into this podcast and you joined pre-show and I said, so hey Jonathan, tell me about yourself. Who are you? What do you do in the real estate investment industry? And
Right.
what do you
But that's a great point.
terrible at your job. Like you have to do some prep work for any meeting that you're going into, and it can be very light prep work. But if you can use something like you alluded to, it's like, well, here's what my online portal is telling me your house is worth. What do you think? Right?
Right.
And there's
Yeah. You're gonna have a long, and I always have the screen up. I'm going one by one. I don't use robocallers for the same reason because it doesn't keep up. I want my data there. So I have the value up there. I can see the tax history. I can see when it's sold. And I personally, this is what I do. I like to tell people that I know what's going on because that means that I'm doing my research. So you have about a 30% of people who are like offended, like you've really been stalking them. How do you know how much my house sold for? I'm like, I can send you the website it's on. Everything's public available. I just want you to know that I'm doing my due diligence. I'm not here to waste your time. If you're not interested, it's no problem. I got 20 other calls to make in the next hour. But it sounds like you have some level of interest, or you just want to have a discussion about the property in your area. I know the area. I have all the data sitting before me. Would you like to know what I think your house might be worth before I see it? And you're always like, I always call it, future casting. You're always future casting that you're going to show up there at some point. This is the value I see now. But when I come meet you for the first time in person, then I'll have a chance to look through your home. Maybe the value goes up. Maybe it's in a lot better shape than I thought. Maybe there's things in the basement that I can find that you didn't know about. But this is part of the dialogue. And I think that's it. You make a really good point. These are the ways that you get to the next level, and you can't do it by just not doing research and hoping for the best. As you said, if you're going on a business interview and the corporation's there and they say, well, what do you know about our company? And you're like, oh, I didn't research the company. So you just came to a job interview to work for this company and you don't know anything about the company? Like, goodbye. Like, you're not getting the job. It's a great point that you made.
and it goes into what I think we talked about this pre-show, but it goes into how you scale up, right?
Yeah.
Because if you get that nailed down as a solo entrepreneur, as a solo real estate investment, and you know that going into, like, let's say you have 8 discovery calls this week lined up, right? And you go into each one of those with 5 minutes worth of research that you know that you could spin in a positive way in that conversation to
Yeah.
show that you want to do business with them. So as you said, to take it out of the realm of mass marketing and into the realm of a owner to owner conversation or owner to owner business discussion, right?
Yeah.
To do that, and if you don't basically map out what your own processes are, then you can't teach it to someone else. Because if you hire someone and they've got bad best practices, they're not following your best practices, then your results are going to tank, right? So like you
Yeah.
need to be able to teach it.
Well, and just think about scaling in general. I think when a lot of people scale, they're trying to figure out like what's your efficiency on the phone. So they're trying to say like what's your call time? Call time is the most overvalued thing in the world. I had a big on-market real estate team for a long time. We were using Zillow. We were on Zillow Flex. We were getting like 300 leads a month. And at the time, Zillow, and applies to off-market acquisition and whatever you're using, they would say like, well, we want your call time to be like under 3 minutes, set the appointment. And I'm like, well, I would tell my whole team of 50 agents, I would say, the longer the call time, the better. As long as you're not just, if you're building a relationship, you're going to get a client. You're not just going to, I don't want just an appointment. I can go show houses to anyone. And that's what another point where that I think people are missing. It goes to what we're saying. The more research you do, the more connection you have. I'd rather have a VA on the phone for 10 minutes having a good conversation, setting a follow-up call, than setting an appointment that I'm going to go to that, again, the person's not going to show up because I said it in 1 minute. And that's where the issues are in scaling. You use technology to scale, but then you lose your core values of how you created this business and what the connection means one to one. That's the problem with spray and pray. Again, if you have money to burn, spray and pray will work, but your acquisition specialist is going to have a lot of bad appointments, and that's not efficient.
Yeah, we have, there's also an argument for outsourcing at certain points. So we have a done for you service at Launch Control called Launch Leads.
Yeah.
And we've tried this in a couple of ways. And what we did initially, this is a few years ago, what we did initially was we were taking leads all the way through discovery calls. So we were running an initial discovery call
Yeah.
and then handing very detailed notes over to acquisitions teams for them to follow up. We stopped doing that. And the reason why we stopped doing that was it's to go back to other like business principles, right? Like if I want to, if you call me and or I get in a conversation with you and I give you all of the information that I can about myself, about my business, and I feel like I'm talking to the decision maker,
Yeah.
and then at the end of that call, you go, well, I don't have any power to do anything. Let me connect you with my boss. And I go, it's deflating, right? Like I feel like
Yeah.
I
Like
just got
I thought we were
everything.
getting somewhere.
I
I
thought we
agree.
were getting somewhere, and all you were doing was doing a a in-person form fill. I didn't realize that, and that's
Yeah.
frustrating.
Oh, and also on the other end, I think that the person who takes over has the responsibility to take over where the notes end. You don't go back and re-verify everything there. Then of course it's the same thing as you're saying. Like, well, I already told this to somebody else. That happens in lending all the time. If you get a loan for a residential home with a big bank, you have your upfront person. Then the next thing you know, they're transferred to someone in Minnesota. Then you have your closer. Then you have your underwriting. It's like, why am I talking to four people? I already sent you this form. And they're like, well, I don't have it. That's not really my problem. And again, that's a disconnection with the person because the
Yeah.
person now becomes a lead. And when a lead is called a lead, they're not a person. They're a commodity. And that's where scaling gets trouble. How many leads did you call today? I don't know. Some of them aren't leads. They're crappy. Did you go through them? Again, same thing. Did you make 200 calls today? I'd rather somebody make 50 calls where they spent extra time researching which were the best calls to make instead of just letting Mojo dial the phone over and over, and doing the same script. Again, at scale, does that technically work? Yeah, but I would suggest there's a better way to do it.
No, I agree, and I think the data that comes through our system it proves that out. So going back to launch leads, right?
Yeah,
The done for you service, what we do at this point is we hand off to decision makers. So we do all of the text marketing, all of the filtering through the early engagement, and anyone that's willing to discuss their home, we pass that off to some. It's let me get you to someone on my team
yeah,
who knows this a bit better, but we're basically doing the warm lead handoff to that person. Now, we have stats in the system. Now, if the person that on the acquisitions team makes that call within 5 minutes and
yeah,
uses the notes in launch control, the odds of them closing that deal go up exponentially.
yeah,
If if they use it as just a cold outreach service and they follow up 24 hours later or 48 hours later, as you alluded to earlier, the effectiveness goes way, way, way down, right? It has to be part of the person wants to feel like they have been introduced to an organization that
right.
can
That's
bring them
ready.
forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Same as what we said. Response time is huge, and any type of leads or client acquisition, your response time is so important because then, as you said, you're making it more of a smooth transition. So, hey, I take the information, I'm going to transfer you. They're going to call you back within 5 minutes. They're going to have all these notes, and they're not going to ask you to retell me any of the story. They're going to get to the point. They're going to have the values, and those are the systems that will help you scale. That's where you have your systems dialed in to say like, hey, it's 2 minutes to a call. The quicker, if we're 30 seconds, great. That, what, that's a 10 times higher likelihood of close. And that's how you need to understand the stats, and that's why you need to be sitting there. So for people who are new, a lot of times they'll pick up a program or something, but then it's part-time, so they're like, get to the stuff the next day. No one's hot the next day. They don't forget who you are.
Yeah,
Every list that you pull as a real estate investor, someone else is pulling the same list. So you're not the only person calling 20 years owned and out of state. You're part of a conglomerate who's spray calling them as well. So do you want to be like everyone else and call the next day or say the same thing? Or do you want to break it up a little? Like you said, maybe your text is just a little bit more inventive. I believe that transparency is the most important thing in off-market acquisition, relationship building, because no one else is being transparent. Hey, I'll buy your house for cash. Great, send me a proof of funds. I don't have a proof of funds. I don't even know who I'm working for. I'm a VA in a place. Great. Well, that's not a good call. So you have to be able to solve these problems to scale and understand, like, hey, if they ask for this, it's a flow chart. Everything about acquisition is a flow chart, and you can teach that at scale, but you have to teach it with a more mindful approach, which is connectivity instead of forcing the ball through the hole quicker.
Yeah, you've given a couple of examples that I think are really beneficial. One where you said, for the person who said, "Well, how'd you get my number?" Or and you said, "Well, this is publicly available information." Like, I think that's like being just transparent about that because they know that,
I
right?
text them the link. I
Yeah,
text them I have the screen up and I saw text you the link right now. Pull up the link. Like anybody can see this. This isn't rocket
yeah,
science, you know. But sometimes if you're talking to someone who's 80, they really don't understand. You know, if they don't use the
yeah,
internet, you have to explain it. Said I'm trying to do my research so we can have a better call. You're building trust. You know,
yeah,
everything's
and
building trust.
there's no apology in that,
No,
right?
I don't apologize for anything.
Yeah,
Not in that context. I think it's very important. You know, that's a good point.
like we had to block early on in launch control. We had to block the phrase "sorry if this is out of the blue." Like, what a weird thing to have to block. But so many people started with an apology that it started getting flagged by the filtering system going through the carrier channels because there was an odd number of people saying sorry if this is out of the blue. Right.
Yeah.
So like leading with an
Why would you
apology.
be sorry for trying to make a win-win situation happen? I'm sorry that I want to pay you $300,000 for your house. That's you know that's a good point, and it's ridiculous. I mean, you always want to be moving in a direction, and as I was saying, the people who are craziest when they're responding to you, those are often some of the closest to close because they're just mad at the other people who did it the wrong way. So I always say, like, is something wrong? You know, are you okay? You know, maybe you have something else going on because all I did was use publicly available information to call you to see if you're interested in selling. If you're not, you know, you can tell me to screw off right now and I'll just hang up. I'll never call you again. Is that what you want? You know, you have to put them back on the spot. And again, I was a prosecutor for 8 years and a criminal defense attorney for 2. So I'm a little more advanced in negotiation. But, you know, these are things that you have to learn. If somebody is yelling at you, they have a bone to pick. Probably not with you since you just called them for the first time. So can you move it in a better direction to get closer, you know, to a next conversation or an appointment or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few different coaches on, and what you're alluding to is something that a lot of them, everybody uses, right? Which is you have to have these pause moments in conversations. You have to be able to have these questions that are meant to get them talking and get them opening up. I think Steve Trang and Ian Ross at Close More Sales refer to it as
Yeah.
like being the hero, make them the hero of their own story, right?
Yeah.
And give them the ability to feel like they're guiding the conversation more so than you being like, well, I'm an investor. Here's what I can offer. Here are two different paths. What do you think? What makes the most sense? And they're like, I'm not engaged in this conversation. You just said stuff at my face. Right. So
Yeah.
it's those, it gets into what you and I were talking about pre-show. And I think there's a lot of correlation between what you're talking about with being transparent and what we were saying is like, how do you maintain empathy as you scale up? How do you maintain empathy as you grow? It seems like there's a lot of correlation between just being transparent and being empathetic.
Transparency builds trust. So if you want to get somewhere with someone, you need to build trust. So if they have an issue with how you got in touch with them, you have to explain and show them that I'm not doing anything crazy. Like I'm not stalking you. And to get to the next level, you have to continue to build trust. So the more information that you gain on the call, you're always going to bring back. So I used to do a thing that people thought was crazy. So I would call the same people, the sellers, I'd call them every single month, and I would never ask about the real estate. You know, once every 4 calls, I would ask about the real estate. I knew they were a year out, but I'm an absolute machine at calling on time. When I say, if I tell you I'm going to call you on the 28th of every month, I'm going to call you on the 28th of every month at 10 a.m. because it's on my schedule. And they always say in the end, well, it's funny you didn't even ask me about the property. I said, well, I know. I thought we were just becoming friends here. When you're interested in selling, I know you're going to call me. Like, what else are we doing? I don't need to ask you about a property. You'll tell me when you're ready, right? They're like, oh, that's a good point. You're different. And I really am different. I mean that stuff. But I mean, a lot of people try to formulate empathy, but it's pretty obvious when you're not. If you're jumping at the gun trying to get an answer, oh, well, if it's going to take me 8 months, eight phone calls of 3 minutes each to get a deal, I don't want to do it. Give up. You're not good at this because that person may lead you to 10 other deals because they're going to tell other people like he's not pushy, like the other people. He actually asked me, he said he'd pay for the move, he'd clean out the house. These are the things that you need to do is again, relationship building, basically just being a regular person and not a robot. will get you a lot farther. And I think you can use all the things that are out there to get you in the room. You still have to perform once you get in the room.
Yeah, there's you can in launch control you can apply everything that you just said to the drip automations.
Yeah.
It's one of it's one of my big pet peeves is when someone has a 12 message drip automation that goes out for a year because they know the person isn't ready to sell,
Yeah.
and every one of those 12 messages is, do you want a cash offer for the house,
Right.
rephrased in some slightly different way.
Yeah.
It it's white noise, right? But if
Drip.
you can be a person,
Sorry. Yeah,
go ahead.
drip campaigns are great. You can create a drip campaign in your mind of how you would want to be approached. You know, drip text 6 is a joke. It's a joke. It's something completely out of it's you're just changing the dynamic. So I've written very extensive drip campaigns. I'm not a big automation person, but for people who are non-responsive, like of course you put them on a drip campaign. But you have
Yeah.
to, again, you have to be ready for when they answer the drip. And when they answer the drip, you want it to automatically turn off. So like, well, now it's on me. Once they respond, you have to take control of the situation, similar to what we were saying before about not apologizing. I'm just doing my job as a real estate investor. If you're not interested, it's no problem. But I need to be there when they respond, because that's the most. If you're on a drip campaign and they're on drip 7, and then they respond, hey, I'm thinking about interested. I think I might be interested now, and you don't respond for 2 days, it's dead. Like, the whole drip campaign is not worth it because you were asleep at the wheel. And that's why you have to be in control of the technology you use, understand exactly how it works, how to access it, so you don't miss anything. Because again,
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people do. Well, it's like people with email. They're like, oh, I never miss an email. And you say, well, pull up your email right now and tell me how many unread emails. It's like the average is like over 10,000. And you're
Yeah.
like, so you're telling me you're not. Real estate agents will say, like, I've never missed a client in there. Sure. You have 10,000 unread email. It's not all J. Crew. You're missing
Yeah.
something. It's because they don't know how to work their own system.
Yeah. And within that, speed of response, of course, again, really important. But I like what you said about thinking through kind of how you would want to receive these messages.
Yeah.
And if you look at the text messages in your phone, none of them are 3 paragraphs. None of them are really like well written offers that are perfectly grammatically correct. They're usually, you're talking, so to speak, in fits and starts in text,
Yeah.
right? And so you think about that in terms of a drip automation. Not everything has to be this scripted new angle, new approach. Some of it can just be a very human check-in. And the other thing that you said that I think is important is, like, when they do respond, you have to be ready, which goes back to what you said about doing research, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you've done your research and you've got it in the notes in launch control, or you've got it in your CRM, and you're able to have that memory recall, that can be really powerful if you're able to say, like, hey, it's been like 10 months, did anybody ever build in that empty lot next to you guys? Like,
Exactly.
it's
I,
something tangible.
I would take that one step further. I would say that the notes that you take that have nothing to do with the real estate will get you the furthest. You want to make sure you know the partner's name, the kid's name, where they came from, where they're going to, what their main issue was. If you bring that up on the second call, you'll 10x the trust. And that goes to taking notes inside of a system. So, like you said, you get the call. Oh, boom! Look, here's all my notes in front of me. Oh, they said they had 3 cats that they needed to rehome before they left. I can connect them with a local shelter. That's your next call. If you're just freewheeling it on every call, of course you're failing. Like, no, that shouldn't be a surprise. You're not using the technology for its most advantage. The best thing about every CRM or app or system that's helping you try to close is that you can leave the notes in there. So when the profile comes up, it's right there. I do it in my phone in terms of, if I'm putting in someone's name for the company, I'm putting a description that helps me remember something, so that if the phone comes up, of course I'm not going to answer, but I'm going to decline it and then text them. My message says, like, I'm never going to listen to this, so just text me. So everybody texts me, but I've already gotten the alert, like, hey, I know what this is about. So there's lots of ways, again, that you can use it. And again, what we're saying is really the same. Like, you have all the stuff in front of you, you have to use it to its best ability, and that means knowing how the technology works so you can help yourself be more efficient on that call.
Yeah, and as you scale up, as you get bigger, you add additional pieces of technology, as you add additional marketing channels. it's really important not to see those things as separate entities, because if
Yeah.
you've got notes in launch control and a good client profile, even some non-real estate related profile information in launch control, and then that doesn't translate over to your CRM, and the homeowner gets your acquisitions team and they're like, so tell me about yourself, right?
Yeah.
You lost an opportunity, right? If you've
Yeah.
sent them a direct mail piece and you're not tracking that you're sending a text to that same person, they're going to see you as two separate entities, not as the same company giving them multiple access points to solutions. So
Yeah.
you have to be able to tie everything together. Otherwise, you start to get into that robotic mode and miss personalization opportunities.
Yeah, and that goes to understanding your what technology is the most relevant to you. You know, which one are you using? If you can put notes in the one that's getting you out there and sending the text, then that's what you should use. You know, everybody always says, "What's the best CRM to use?" It's the one that you're going to use. You know, because
Yeah.
you can have 10 CRMs and 10 different apps, but you have to figure out like which is the most vital to my business. Put everything in there. You know, like you said, you migrate to something else and then all the notes don't transfer and then you know nothing. You know, that's happened to me before. It happens to everybody. So if you're sending stuff out from launch control and you can drop notes in there, that's where you want to be. That's where the contacts are coming from. You want to pull it up and use the system for its max capacity.
Yeah, and I'm sure you know David Richter as well. Like
Yeah.
David talks about, one of the things he preaches is really knowing what your need number is and knowing what your want number is, right? And it's not just about, well, I want to. I sometimes open this show with how we can build generational wealth together, but that phrase is somewhat negative in that people want to. Everybody wants generational wealth, but like, how do you stage gate it, right? Like, what's your first stage you want to get to? And if your first stage is that you want to close 8 deals in 2025, well then you don't need a Salesforce based CRM to close 8 deals. you
Right.
don't you don't need 5 marketing channels to close 8 deals. So if you work backwards from your goal and then look at what marketing is going to get me there the fastest, you know do I even need more than a spreadsheet for a CRM, or can I use like launch plus spreadsheet?
Yeah.
It really is based on what you need to optimize within those stages, I think.
Yeah, well, look, as consumers, I think people are trying to always add, extra stuff to help them be more efficient. But if you have 6 programs that are generally doing the same thing, what's the point? Why don't you pay less, use the one that you're using the most, that's making the most impact? Yeah, maybe it's not, doesn't have all the bells and whistles, that something else has. Who cares? What do you need bells and whistles? All you're trying to do is talk to these people. And again, you can boil that down. If you want to do 8 in a year, that's one every month and a half. So you're just going to boil it down to a month and a half. Okay, well, what's my call ratio the way that I'm doing it? What's my answer rate? What's my conversion rate? You start that, you just track that on a spreadsheet. I use spreadsheets. I have like 10 spreadsheets that are open at all times. People think it's crazy. I track how much I meditate, how much I walk, how much I read, everything. But guess what? I know everything about what I do for the last several years. And you should be the same way with any lead source. I was the same way with any online sources. I'm tracking everything, how many times I've called them, because I want to know after a year. The only way you're going to be able to scale, as we were saying, is if you know your data. And you can't know your data if you have it in 10 different places and you don't know how many times have I talked to Chuck? Hey, last time I talked to you was, 2 months ago. Great. That's a good reminder. Yeah. And then you want to remind them with something else again in your notes that can light that light bulb. And hey, P.S., LinkedIn and Facebook is out there. That's why you do the research. What if you
Yeah.
look up your number one lead on like $1 million, potential portfolio loan? What if you found out that they went to the same college as you and you could have known that and you didn't? And all you had to do was look up on LinkedIn and say, hey, look, Steve went to Michigan too. Boom, you're 10 steps ahead. And just because it took you 2 seconds to click a link and put in a name on LinkedIn, that can really sum up what we've been talking about. A tiny bit of extra effort over the top can get you 10, 20, 30, 40 times faster, quicker ahead, but much more efficient and much better at building relationships.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, from launch control, I would much rather have, a few hundred people on our middle subscription, the core subscription,
Yeah.
taking the time to do the research, getting every possible deal out of every piece of data that they put into the system, and knowing their recipients and knowing like what their engagement with their recipients is going to be. Because if they do that, they're going to stick. That then launch control becomes very like fundamental, foundational to their business, and it becomes something that they can rely on for consistency, as opposed to, like pushing someone, oh, go just join the enterprise plan and send out as many messages as you can, would
Right.
never, ever, ever be my advice, because it's inefficient. I'd rather have less of a subscription and more efficiency over the long term than a burst of messages at a higher subscription. It just doesn't serve the business.
Yeah, I mean, same principle for a new investor. Do you want to say you have the budget to spend to mail to 300 people? I would personally just mail the 300 people around my home, if that was what your plan was. If you want to buy another home like that, is that better, or do you just want to pick 300 random locations and you think that you're going to be better? It's not efficient. If you just focused on continually contacting those people and they're like, well, only 5 raised their hand the first time. Great, keep going. Everybody has this like short-term thinking mentality where like, oh, I sent out the text blast through launch control and nobody answered yet. It's been 9 minutes. You have to
Yeah.
stay on the campaign. Like you might take 4 or 5, because then they know that you're dedicated, especially when you humanize it a little. That's what in postcards I was an expert. I can always beat the 8 and 8 months. I can usually get a response in 2 or 3 months because my postcards are much better. Like I'm mailing a farm in my area, I'm not going to stop, and I don't ever ask for anything. I actually go the other way and say, I'm not even asking you for anything. That's the whole point. That's what real people do.
Yeah.
They don't always tell you, hey, I have a cash offer for you. You don't even have cash, most of these people. And that's what I think you can make fun of it against other people, and again, be a human.
Yeah, and it's one of the great strengths of text engagement is, we were talking about A/B testing models, right? And if you're going to send out a direct mail piece, even to 300 people, as soon as you stick a stamp on that thing, that's your A test, right?
Yeah,
And you need to see what comes in, and if it didn't generate the amount of conversations that you have, you're going to have to spend the same amount to B test, to C test. Right? Whereas with launch control, you can send a batch of 150 messages, which costs almost nothing.
yeah,
And if you don't get the kind of response that you want that day, later that day, you can try a B test to the same audience, a subset of the same audience, and see what that gets you. Try a C test. You sent 3 batches during the course of the day, and you to the same relevant audience, and you've got data to show, what time did they respond, what type of
yeah,
messages
right,
did they
right.
respond, and you can iterate for almost zero cost, which you can't do with the more expensive passive marketing channels. You can't do that with PPC, really. You can't do that with direct mail. You can a bit with PPC, but it's a longer testing window.
Yeah.
With text engagement, you can do it the same day and get some provable data.
Yeah, I agree. 300 leads, send 150A, send 150B. You have data because at least you're hedging your bets on something. Hey, A got a 20% higher response rate. So next time, let's just try A.
Yeah,
Okay, that didn't go as well. Okay, well, let's go back and A/B test again, or let's adjust it. I mean, I think that's a really good point. Like you're saying, in texting, it's so easy to adjust. Sometimes you can even make fun of your own text.
yeah,
The thing is, text, like for me, I whatever I text from my phone, I have on iMessage. When you're in a system, you have your whole system, so you know when you contacted them, and you can sometimes make fun of yourself in that way. And again, that's just humanizing the experience, and trying to figure out like which things are working. Sometimes when no one responds, like we had a "did I drop the ball" thing, like that's something for old clients that always work. Is there something that I did that offended you? They're always going to respond to that. People love to talk about themselves. What do they like to do? They like to talk about themselves first, and they like to feel heard. So if you're making calls or doing outreach, those are the things that you want. As you were saying before, you want to open up the floor, like coaches will say, so they can talk about themselves, but you have to make sure they're being heard. That's why you take good notes, so next time they know, wow, he was really listening to me. He remember that my cousin Janie lives in the town next to him. If
yeah.
you stay on that, your conversion rate will absolutely skyrocket just from taking notes, which you should be doing anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like little things, like you can't do this with every message, but you can do it on occasion. Add your own phone number to the list so that you get the text
Yeah. Oh,
message that
yeah.
you're sending out and
Yeah.
look at it on your phone and be like,
Yeah,
does
do I
this
like
resonate?
this? Right.
Do I
Yeah,
like
that's a
it?
very good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
on the email drips, we always put somebody we know on. Someone you can put your spouse on, you can put a friend on. Like, does this annoy the crap out of you? Yeah, it
Yeah.
annoys the crap out of me. Okay. We'll take it from a random consumer who's not your ideal audience. What is annoying about it? Get that help from your friends. That's a really good point.
Yeah. All right. So this has been amazing, Jonathan. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but
Appreciate it.
I do want to leave a few minutes to just talk about what you've got going on and
Yeah.
talk about the podcast, your business, anything else you want to get out there to the people.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed the time here. I think I love talking to new audiences and getting out information. My podcast is called Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. We're at about 180 episodes. I just like talking to real estate investors. There's not really much else to it. I have fun with it. Had some of the biggest names in the game on there. And that's obviously the website is the same as the name.com. My hub site is Trust Green, which is TrustGreene. And on social, that's usually where you can find me. I practice mindful social media as well, which means my personal account is my personal account. There's real estate stuff that goes through, but there's different accounts for those. And I like to connect with people online. Again, as you've heard multiple times, no one's ever going to get me on the phone. It's literally impossible. Because it's just a bad use of my time. Personally, I don't enjoy it, but I'm textable and reachable via DM. Yeah, and I appreciate you having me on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Oh no, thank you so much. And for everyone listening in, we'll make sure that we put those links in the show notes below, so you'll be able to reach out to Jonathan if you'd like. And yeah, definitely give Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing a listen. It's a great podcast and has some really good archives of guests on there. All right. Well, thanks again, Jonathan. Appreciate it. And yeah, let's talk again soon.
Thanks, Michael. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the time.